What would you do if the family you built your life around turned on you at your most vulnerable moment? In the final weeks of a difficult pregnancy, what would you do if your husband and his parents physically threw you out of your own home, leaving you on the cold pavement with nothing but the clothes on your back? This is a story about that. It's about a woman who was shattered, a woman who was betrayed by everyone she trusted. But it's also the story of what happens next. It's about how she picked up the pieces, not to rebuild her old life, but to forge a weapon. Stay with me, because I'm going to tell you how a woman, 8 months pregnant with twins and cast aside like trash, went from the curb to the boardroom. I'm going to tell you how she didn't just get even. She got everything. And if you believe in the power of resilience and the sweet, cold taste of justice, you're going to want to hear every last word of this. But let me back up. Let me take you back to before the world ended. My world, for 10 years, had been Marcus. It was a world of polished marble floors that reflected the light from floor-to-ceiling windows. It was the scent of expensive cologne mixed with the fresh linen of his custom-tailored shirts. It was the low hum of his luxury car pulling into the driveway precisely at 6:30 every evening. Our life was a carefully curated masterpiece of success. He was the charismatic CEO of Sterling Enterprises, a family-owned empire built by his grandfather. I was the supportive wife, the woman who had put her own architectural career on hold to create the perfect home, the perfect social life, the perfect backdrop for his relentless ambition. And now, I was carrying the next generation of Sterlings. Twins, 2 tiny heartbeats that fluttered inside me, a constant, beautiful reminder of the future we were building. I was 8 months along, swollen and slow, but happier than I had ever been. The house was quiet that Tuesday afternoon, the kind of quiet that feels peaceful, heavy with contentment. I was arranging flowers in the foyer, the scent of lilies filling the air. Marcus had just returned from a 2-day emergency business trip to Chicago. He'd kissed me goodbye with a familiar mix of haste and affection, his hand resting for a moment on the swell of my belly. He'd been traveling more lately. The company was expanding, he'd said. Big deals on the horizon. I never questioned it. Why would I? His ambition was part of who he was, part of what I loved. I went upstairs to unpack his travel bag, a small domestic ritual I always performed. I unzipped the leather duffel, the scent of stale airplane air and hotel soap hitting my nose. I pulled out his crumpled suits and shirts, sorting them for the dry cleaner. And then I saw it. At the bottom of the bag, nestled in a corner of the silk lining, was something small and hard. My fingers closed around it. I pulled it out and opened my palm. It was a single earring. It wasn't mine. It was a delicate platinum drop earring, a sliver of impossible elegance with a tiny, perfect sapphire dangling at its end. It was expensive. It was exquisite, and I had never seen it before in my life. My heart didn't drop. It didn't pound. It just stopped. For one long, silent second, the entire world stopped with it. The air in the room grew thick and heavy, unbreathable. The scent of lilies from downstairs suddenly seemed cloying, funereal. I stood there, staring at the tiny blue stone in my hand. It was an impossibly small object to hold the weight of a dawning apocalypse. My first thought was denial. A swift, desperate wave of it. A mistake. It must have fallen into his bag at the airport, at a meeting. A gift for me, perhaps, and he'd lost the other one. The explanations scrambled through my mind, each one more flimsy and pathetic than the last. But I knew, deep in the pit of my stomach, in a place that had felt nothing but warmth and love for a decade, a shard of ice began to form. I closed my hand around the earring, the sharp edges of the platinum digging into my skin. I said nothing. I finished unpacking his bag, my movements stiff and robotic. I put the earring in the hidden pocket of my jewelry box, a cold little secret in a box full of warm memories. Outwardly, I remained the same, the serene, loving, pregnant wife. But inside, I had become a detective in the ruins of my own life. The investigation began that night. My grief was a cold, hard thing, and I packed it down deep, fueling a new, terrifying clarity. I waited until he was asleep, his breathing deep and even beside me. The man I had shared a bed with for 10 years was now a stranger, a subject. I slipped out of bed and went to his study. The password to his laptop was our anniversary. The sheer, arrogant laziness of it made my stomach clench. He never thought I'd look. He never thought I'd have a reason to. He was wrong. The files were organized with his usual meticulousness: business folders, financial statements, investment portfolios. But I wasn't looking for those. Not yet. I went to his personal email, then his cloud storage, my fingers flying across the keyboard. And there it was, a folder, innocuously labeled Projects. It wasn't full of blueprints or business proposals. It was full of her, photos, dozens of them, a woman with sleek dark hair and a smile that was both sharp and predatory. She was wearing the other sapphire earring. They were in Paris. A trip he'd told me was a solo venture capital summit. They were on a yacht in the Caribbean. During a week he was supposedly at a tech conference in Austin. Her name was Isabel. I learned that from the emails. Emails filled with language that scorched my eyes, promises, plans, a future that did not include me or the sons I was carrying. I scrolled through financial records next. A separate credit card, one I never knew existed. The statements were a roadmap of his betrayal. 5-star hotels, Michelin-starred restaurants, a charge from a high-end jewelry store that matched the date he'd supposedly been in Chicago. The price tag made me feel sick. It was more than my father had earned in a year. But the worst discovery was a series of wire transfers, huge sums of money siphoned from a joint savings account, our children's future college fund, and moved into an offshore account under a name I didn't recognize. A shell corporation. I sat there in the dark, the glow of the screen illuminating the tears I didn't realize were falling. It wasn't just an affair. It was a systematic dismantling of our life. He wasn't just cheating on me. He was erasing me. The despair was a physical thing. It felt like drowning. My lungs burned. The weight of the babies pressed down on me, and for the first time, their presence felt less like a promise and more like a trap. He had done this to me while I was carrying his children. The cruelty of it was bottomless. For 2 days, I moved through my life like a ghost. I smiled. I made dinner. I asked about his day. Each word was a lie. Each touch was a betrayal. The heartbreak was a constant crushing pressure in my chest. But beneath the grief, something else was happening. The ice shard in my gut was growing, spreading through my veins. The sorrow was beginning to freeze, to harden. It was calcifying into something cold and sharp and utterly furious. The pivot happened on a Saturday. It was a week before Christmas. His parents, Eleanor and Richard Sterling, had invited us for brunch. They were cold, imposing figures, steeped in old money and an unshakable belief in their own superiority. They had never fully approved of me, the middle-class girl their brilliant son had chosen. I walked into their cavernous, antique-filled home, feeling like a fraud. Marcus was charming, of course, kissing his mother's cheek and clapping his father on the back. They fawned over him, the heir to their dynasty. They barely looked at me, their eyes flicking over my swollen belly with something that looked less like joy and more like detached appraisal. I had found something new the night before, a draft of a legal document on his computer, a prenuptial agreement, not for me, for Isabel. That was the final piece, the confirmation. He wasn't just having an affair. He was planning a replacement. I must have looked pale. Eleanor commented on it, her voice laced with that particular brand of condescending concern she had perfected. "Are you feeling quite well, Alara? You look dreadfully drained. Pregnancy can be so unbecoming on some women." Something inside me snapped. The carefully constructed dam of my composure finally broke. "I'm fine," I said, my voice tight. "Just a little tired of the lies." Marcus froze, a coffee cup halfway to his lips. Richard lowered his newspaper. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" she asked, her voice like chipping ice. And I told them, I don't know why. Maybe I had a foolish, desperate hope that they, his parents, would be horrified, that they would see the monster their son had become. I was a fool. I told them about the affair, the money, the plans for a new life. I spoke in a low, trembling voice, laying out the evidence I had collected. When I finished, there was a heavy silence. Marcus stared at me, his face a mask of fury. But it was his parents' reaction that truly destroyed me. Richard Sterling slowly folded his newspaper and placed it on the table. He looked not at his son, but at me. There was no shock in his eyes, no sympathy, only cold, hard calculation. "So," he said, his voice flat, "you've been snooping." Eleanor laughed. A short, ugly sound. "My dear, did you really think you could hold a man like Marcus? A man of his stature has certain needs. You became a complacent little homemaker. Isabel is a partner. She understands his world. They knew. They had known all along. The world tilted on its axis. They weren't just condoning it. They were complicit. I was just an incubator for their legacy, and my service was no longer required." "Get out," Marcus finally snarled, his voice low and venomous. "You come into my parents' home and dare to make these hysterical accusations?" "Accusations? I have proof, Marcus. The photos, the bank statements. You violated my privacy," he roared, standing up so fast his chair scraped violently against the floor. "You have no right." "This is my house," Eleanor said, rising to her feet, a queen dismissing a servant, "and we will not have this melodrama under our roof. You will leave, now." I couldn't move. I was paralyzed by the sheer breathtaking cruelty of it all. I looked at these three people, this family I had dedicated my life to, and saw nothing but vipers. "No," I whispered. "Our home. I have nowhere to go." That was when Marcus grabbed my arm. His grip was hard, bruising. I said, "Get out." He started pulling me toward the door. Richard moved to open it, his face impassive. "You can't do this," I sobbed, struggling against his grip. "I'm pregnant with your children." "They're Sterling's," Eleanor said from behind me, her voice ringing with finality. "They'll be well taken care of. You, on the other hand, are no longer a part of this family's concerns." They dragged me. They physically dragged me, 8 months pregnant and sobbing, through the marble foyer of their mansion and out the heavy oak door. Richard pushed me, a firm, final shove that sent me stumbling down the 2 steps of the porch. I landed hard on my knees on the cold stone walkway. The door slammed shut. The bolt clicked into place. I was alone, on the curb, in a stupor of shock and pain. The despair was absolute. It was the lowest point of my life. I had lost my husband, my home, my family, my future, all in the space of 10 minutes. I stayed there for a long time, the cold seeping into my bones. Then, the ice in my veins, the hard, furious thing that had been growing, finally consumed me. The tears stopped. The shaking subsided. All the pain, all the grief, all the humiliation, it all burned away, leaving behind something pure and diamond hard. Resolve. I pushed myself up, my body aching. I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady. There was only one person I could call. A man Marcus had once called his greatest rival. A man Marcus had betrayed in a business deal years ago, costing him millions. A man who was known for being as brilliant as he was ruthless. Julian Vance. He answered on the second ring. "Ilara, is everything all right?" My voice, when it came out, was unrecognizable. It was cold. It was level. It was the voice of a woman who had absolutely nothing left to lose, and therefore was capable of anything. "Julian," I said, "I need your help. I want to destroy Marcus Sterling, and I want to take his entire company down with him." There was a pause on the other end of the line, then a low chuckle. "Well," Julian Vance said, his voice rich with a sudden predatory interest, "this sounds like it's going to be fun. My car will be there in 10 minutes. We have work to do." That was the pivot, the moment the victim died and the avenger was born. The war room was Julian's penthouse office, a glass-walled sanctuary overlooking the city. The mood was not one of grief or sympathy. It was one of cold, hard strategy. Julian Vance was a shark who smelled blood in the water, and I was the one who was going to show him exactly where to bite. He assembled a team within hours. A forensic accountant who looked like a librarian but had the heart of a predator, a pit bull of a divorce lawyer named Cassandra, and a discreet private investigator who moved with the silence of a shadow. For the next week, we worked. I laid out everything I knew, the offshore accounts, the Shell Corporation, Isabel's name, the timeline of the affair. My mind, once clouded with love, was now a steel trap of facts and figures. The architect in me reawakened, but I wasn't designing buildings. I was designing Marcus's ruin. The plan was multi-phased, surgical. Phase 1 was asset control. Cassandra discovered something wonderful. The mansion, our beautiful home, had been a wedding gift from my parents. They had paid for it in full, and in a moment of sentimental folly, Marcus had agreed to have the deed put solely in my name. It was my only major asset, and it was untouchable. Phase 2 was evidence documentation. The PI, a man named Cole, was dispatched. Within 48 hours, he came back with a treasure trove, high-resolution photos of Marcus and Isabel, audio recordings of them discussing their future, of Marcus mocking me, of him detailing his plans to hide his assets before filing for divorce after the twins were born. It was brutal. It was perfect. Phase 3 was financial warfare. The forensic accountant, a woman named Anya, dove into the offshore accounts. She followed the money trail, uncovering a web of deceit that went far deeper than I imagined. Marcus wasn't just cheating on me. He was cheating his own company. He was using Sterling Enterprises funds to finance his lavish lifestyle with Isabel, funneling money through bogus vendor accounts and into his personal slush fund. He was committing fraud on a massive scale. Phase 4 was the strike. The timing had to be perfect. It had to be when he was at his most arrogant, his most distracted, and I knew exactly when that would be. Christmas Eve. Marcus had called me once since the incident at his parents' house. His voice was cold, devoid of emotion. He told me he was leaving on a business trip through the holidays. He told me his lawyer would be in touch about a settlement. He thought he held all the cards. He thought I was a broken, hysterical mess, crying in some cheap motel room. He had no idea I was in a penthouse office, commanding a small army, preparing to burn his entire world to the ground. Christmas Eve arrived, cold and clear. The city glittered with lights. Marcus was not on a business trip. Cole's surveillance confirmed he and Isabel had checked into a lavish suite at the Four Seasons he was going to propose. Cole had an audio bug in the suite. We knew everything. While Marcus was ordering champagne, I was on the phone with a real estate agent. I was selling my house. A cash offer, 20% below market value for a closing in 6 hours. Done. The money was wired to a new account under my name only. While Marcus was presenting Isabel with a 10-carat diamond ring, I was on a conference call with Julian and Anya. Anya had found it. The key. The offshore Shell Corporation was registered in a country with a new transparency treaty. With the evidence of fraud we had, we could petition a judge to freeze the account. The emergency motion was filed. While Marcus and Isabel were toasting to their brilliant future, I was sitting in front of a laptop directing a team of movers via video call. They were emptying the mansion, every piece of furniture, every work of art, every memory. All of it was being moved into storage units registered under a new LLC I had formed. The house was stripped bare, a hollowed-out carcass of a life that no longer existed. The final piece was the most delicious. Anya, our financial wizard, had discovered that Marcus's fraudulent activities had put Sterling Enterprises in a precarious position. He had leveraged company assets to secure personal loans, creating a massive hidden debt. The company was vulnerable. Julian Vance, smiling like a wolf, began making calls. He was orchestrating a hostile takeover. He started buying up Sterling debt from nervous creditors. He began approaching disgruntled board members, presenting them with the irrefutable proof of their CEO's fraud. By the time the sun rose on Christmas morning, Marcus Sterling was a man who was already ruined. He just didn't know it yet. He returned 2 days later. He pulled his car into the driveway of a house that was no longer his. He walked up to a door that had a new lock. He must have been confused, annoyed. He used his old key, and when it didn't work, he called a locksmith, his arrogance knowing no bounds. He stepped inside, not to the warm, welcoming home he had left, but to a vast, empty space. The rooms echoed with his footsteps. Everything was gone, except for one thing. In the center of the empty living room, on the dusty marble floor where our Christmas tree should have been, was a single, simple manila folder. He walked over to it. He opened it. Inside was a copy of the new deed to the house, showing it had been sold. Behind that was a single photograph, a crystal-clear, high-resolution shot of him placing the diamond ring on Isabel's finger. Behind that were the divorce papers Cassandra had filed that morning, citing adultery and financial fraud. Behind that was an injunction, officially freezing his offshore accounts and personal assets, pending a criminal investigation. And behind that, the final page. It was a press release set to go live in 1 hour. Julian Vance announces acquisition of Sterling Enterprises amidst CEO fraud scandal. His world didn't crumble. It evaporated. That's when I walked in. I didn't come through the front door. I came from the back, through the kitchen, where I had been waiting with Cassandra. I was no longer the weeping, broken woman he had cast aside. My hair was pulled back. I was wearing a sharp, tailored maternity dress. My face was calm. My eyes were cold. He looked up from the folder, his face ashen. The confident swagger, the casual cruelty, all of it was gone. In its place was a dawning, horrified disbelief. "Alara," he whispered, his voice cracking. "What is this? What did you do?" "I did what you taught me to do, Marcus," I said, my voice even and clear, echoing in the empty room. "I made a strategic acquisition. You saw me as a liability. That was a poor business decision on your part." He stared at me, his mind clearly unable to process the scale of his own destruction. "My company, my money, you can't." "Your company?" I gave a small, humorless smile. "Let me be clear. As of 9 o'clock this morning, the board of Sterling Enterprises held an emergency vote. You were removed as CEO. In your place, they have accepted a buyout offer from a new majority shareholder. That shareholder is me." The blood drained from his face. "You? How? You have no money." "Oh, I have money now," I said softly. Julian Vance was more than happy to provide me with the capital, as a partner. He considered it a long overdue return on an old investment you cheated him out of. "I own 60% of your family's legacy, Marcus, and my first act as owner will be to cooperate fully with the SEC's investigation into your financial crimes." His father, Richard, his mother, Eleanor, their entire world, their name, their dynasty, it was all mine now. I had bought their whole world with the help of a man they had scorned. He sank to his knees, the papers fluttering from his hand. He was a king with no castle, a CEO with no company, a man with no future. He had underestimated me. He had assumed my love for him was a weakness he could exploit. He never realized that when you burn love to the ground, what grows from the ashes is often far stronger and infinitely more dangerous. "My sons," he stammered, a last desperate plea. "Our boys. They will be well taken care of," I said, echoing his mother's cruel words back at him. "I will make sure they grow up to be good men. Men who understand the meaning of loyalty and respect. Men nothing like their father." I turned and walked away, leaving him kneeling in the ruins of the life he had so carelessly thrown away. I didn't look back. My new life was waiting, and for the first time in a long time, the future was entirely my own. I was no longer Mrs. Sterling, the quiet architect's wife. I was Alara, the woman who had been dragged from her home and returned to buy the whole damn block, and my work was just beginning.